Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Andrew Meet Rich, and today is one of those days where you open your news feed and just sit there for a moment. We've got Germany's public transit grinding to a halt again, and the reasons go deeper than you'd think. We've got a new German chancellor who apparently wants to know the real name of every person who criticizes him online. 200 IT specialists at Deutsche Bahn walking out with signs during their lunch break, and what they're warning about should concern every single person who rides a train in Europe. We've got a real person, who spent 34 years as a university student, and a court finally told him enough. France is openly debating whether free speech is, and I'm quoting their own president here, nonsense without moderation. Donald Trump stood before Congress and declared a new golden age. His new tariffs are already sending shockwaves through European boardrooms. And then, save for the very end, a confession from one of the richest men on the planet that connects Russian romances, a convicted predator, and a marriage that couldn't survive the truth. You will not want to miss that one. Before we dive in, I want to say something real quick, and I mean this personally. If you find value in what we do here, if this kind of deep, independent analysis matters to you, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't. And if you want to go a step further, consider sponsoring the channel or using YouTube's Super Thanks feature. We pour serious hours into research and fact-checking because I flat out refuse to put unverified nonsense in front of you. That takes resources. Your support makes this possible. Now stay with me to the end because that last story, I promise you, it's the one everyone's going to be talking about. All right, let's get into it. Germany, Friday morning. You wake up, you check your phone, and you realize your bus isn't coming. Your tram isn't coming. In Berlin, the entire BVG system, we're talking metro, U-Bahn, trams, nearly all bus lines, all of it shut down. Not for an hour, for 48 hours. The union Verdi called a strike that hits almost every federal state in the country. Only Lower Saxony got a pass because they've got a peace agreement running through the end of March. Everyone else? Good luck getting to work. Now here's the thing, most outlets won't explain. This isn't just workers being difficult. The negotiations are about a new wage agreement. And BVG, the company that runs Berlin's transit, put a number on what Verdi is asking for. They say meeting all 17 union demands would cost around 150 million euros. On top of that, another 200 to 300 million for new vehicles and equipment. BVG says flatly, we can't afford it. Verdi fires back and says management isn't even willing to negotiate seriously. So you've got two sides dug in and millions of commuters caught in the middle. The S-Bahn, regional and long-distance Deutsche Bahn trains, those keep running. But if your daily commute depends on city transit, you're walking, biking, or staying home. And here's what strikes me about this. No pun intended. Germans complain when transit runs late. Germans complain when transit doesn't run at all. The one thing you can count on with German public transportation is that someone, somewhere, is unhappy with it. But underneath the jokes, there's a real question. If the people who keep your city moving say they can't make ends meet, at what point do you actually listen? Keep that thought, because it connects to what's coming next. Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor, stood up at a CDU party congress and said something that made a lot of people very uncomfortable. He wants more transparency in online debates. Specifically, he wants people to use their real names. He said, and I'm paraphrasing closely here, that participating in political life means engaging in public debate under your own identity. And he expects the same from everyone who criticizes him. Now pause on that for a second. A head of state is saying, if you want to criticize me, put your name on it. That's not a transparency initiative. Let me be blunt, that's a convenience initiative. Because Merz also took a shot at people who hide behind anonymity while demanding maximum transparency from others. And yeah, okay, there's a kernel of fairness in that observation. But Germany's own Justice Minister, Stephanie Hubig, already pushed back on this before it even became a headline. She said people who want to express opinions anonymously shouldn't face consequences for that unless they're committing actual crimes. And that's the line. Right? That's the line that matters. There's a massive difference between holding someone accountable for threats or harassment and demanding that every citizen who posts a critical comment reveal their identity to the government. If you can't see the difference, well, maybe that's the problem. A politician who wants the names of all his critics isn't championing transparency. He's building a list. And if that doesn't give you a slight chill, you might want to think about it a little longer. But let's keep moving because we're not done with Deutsche Bahn. So while the transit workers are striking, something else is happening quietly at Germany's national railway. 200 IT specialists at Deutsche Bahn walked out during their lunch break carrying signs. And these aren't random office workers. These are the people who keep the DB Navigator app running, the app millions of passengers use every single day. These are the people who maintain the computers that thousands of railway employees depend on. And just last week, these same specialists fought off a massive DDoS cyber attack. They barely held the line, but they held it. So what's going on? Deutsche Bahn's management wants to break up the IT division, scatter the specialists across smaller subsidiary companies. The goal, predictably, is to cut costs. But the workers and their unions are warning that this could put up to 4,000 jobs at risk nationwide. In Erfurt alone, up to 500 positions. And here's the part that really gets me. Management isn't saying anything. No official response, no reassurance, just silence, which in corporate speak usually means the worst rumors are probably true. The unions have stepped in with a clear message. Without these IT specialists, the railway isn't a railway. It's just metal on tracks with tickets that cost as much as plane fare. And they're right. You can debate budgets and restructuring all day long, but IT isn't a line item you trim for quarterly savings. It's the spine of the entire system. You break the spine, everything collapses. Remember that, because this pattern of gutting essential infrastructure to save money, it's not unique to Germany. We're seeing it everywhere, and that should worry you. Now let me take you to a courtroom in Schleswig-Holstein, because this story, honestly, it almost sounds made up. A 49-year-old man went to court to fight for his student housing benefit. The problem? He's been enrolled in university for 34 years, 68 semesters. Germany, to its credit, doesn't have a strict rule saying you must finish your degree by a certain date. But 68 semesters pushed that flexibility well past its breaking point. The court said no. The reasoning was straightforward. This man wasn't seriously and purposefully pursuing his education, so he doesn't qualify for benefits meant for students who are actually working toward graduation. Now, to be fair, he did eventually get a degree in economics. It just took him 28 years. Then he enrolled in a second program, classical philology, and spent 12 semesters on what's supposed to be a 7-semester track. There was a similar case in Rhineland-Palatinate, where a man enrolled 26 years ago and kept switching majors, never finishing. And look, I'm not here to ridicule anyone's educational journey, but 34 years of study and 1 diploma, that's not a perpetual student. That's a long-term investment with negative returns. At some point, the system has to draw a line, and this court finally did. What's interesting, though, is what it reveals about how far social support systems can be stretched before someone says, wait, this was never designed for this. It's a small story, sure, but it tells you something bigger about the cracks forming in European welfare frameworks. And speaking of cracks, let me take you to France, because what's happening there with free speech is anything but small. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, said publicly that freedom of speech is, and I want you to hear this carefully, nonsense if it isn't moderated. That's not some random blogger. That's the president of a Western democracy, and his government is acting on it. People are facing consequences for bad jokes. Performances are being cancelled. Broadcasters are losing airtime. Old video recordings are being dug up and used in formal proceedings. Members of parliament are building careers by filing complaints against bloggers and comedians getting content removed. The pressure on social media platforms is intensifying. You've got the arrest of Pavel Durov, pressure on Telegram, police raids on the offices of X, formerly Twitter, right there in Paris. And starting in September, France is restricting social media access for children under 15. Officially, it's about protecting kids, but critics, and there are many, see it as another brick in a wall of digital control. Now, I want you to sit with that contradiction. When a president calls free speech nonsense, that statement itself is an exercise of free speech. The irony is so thick you could spread it on a baguette. But the consequences are real. When the state decides what speech is acceptable and what isn't, who watches the watchers, who decides where moderation ends and censorship begins. If you think this is just a French problem, I gently suggest you look more carefully at what's happening in your own country, because the playbook, it travels. Are you starting to see how these stories connect? Good, because now we're crossing the Atlantic and things get even more intense. Donald Trump stood before Congress and delivered his State of the Union address, declaring that America has entered a golden age. He pointed to economic achievements and claimed his administration has stopped the flow of undocumented migrants. His exact framing was that his policies have made America's enemies freeze with fear. That's a quote. freeze with fear. On the international front, he took credit for participation in a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, promised that Iran would never obtain nuclear weapons under his watch, and announced a military buildup in the Middle East. He also mentioned significant oil shipments from Venezuela, more than 80 million barrels, following what he described as the removal of Maduro. And in a moment that probably captured more attention than any policy point, Trump invited the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team, gold medal winners, and personally presented the goalie with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, right there in Congress. So Trump's golden age, if you're keeping track, is one where adversaries tremble, oil flows freely, and medals are handed out to hockey players during joint sessions of Congress. Now, whether you find that inspiring or theatrical depends largely on where you sit politically. But here's what I want you to notice. The speech was heavy on declarations and light on mechanisms. How exactly does one prevent Iran from developing nuclear capabilities? What does the Venezuela situation look like beyond the oil numbers? These are the follow-up questions nobody on that chamber floor asked. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. But don't switch off yet, because the tariff story that follows, it hits closer to home than you might think. So here's where things get economically serious, and this directly affects everyone watching in Europe. The US Supreme Court ruled that last year's Trump tariffs were unconstitutional. You'd think that would be the end of it, but no. Trump immediately announced new tariffs, an additional 10% on imports worldwide, effective for up to 150 days. Experts are already warning that business uncertainty is about to get significantly worse. Wolfgang Entrup, the head of Germany's Chemical Industry Association, came out and said the chaos in trade policy will continue. New tariffs can drop at any moment. He urged the European Union, with strong backing from Germany, to restart negotiations with Washington immediately. And here's the part that really matters for the fine print. The court ruling doesn't touch sector-specific tariffs. 50% on steel and aluminum, still in place. Tariffs on cars and auto parts, still in effect. There's also an open question about roughly $133 billion in tariffs already collected. The court didn't require the government to refund that money, but companies can try to recover it through the legal system. Good luck with that. And economists keep reminding everyone of something that gets conveniently forgotten in these debates. Tariffs are ultimately paid by American importers and consumers through higher prices. It's not China paying. It's not Germany paying. It's the person at the checkout counter. Trump's approach to global trade, and I've been watching this for years now, is essentially to keep the world economy in a state of constant low-grade panic. Announce tariffs, withdraw tariffs, announce new ones, create just enough uncertainty that no one can plan more than 3 months ahead. And if you're wondering whether that strategy actually benefits anyone, well, that's a very good question. Now, as promised, I saved the most revealing story for last, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of this. Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft, one of the wealthiest human beings on the planet, stood before an internal meeting of the Gates Foundation and made some admissions that are, to put it mildly, staggering. A recording of that meeting ended up in the hands of the Wall Street Journal, and once you hear what's on it, you'll understand why. Gates acknowledged his connections to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted predator whose name has become synonymous with some of the darkest allegations of our time. He called those connections, his words, a huge mistake. He apologized to those who were harmed, but that wasn't all. He also admitted to having affairs with 2 women from Russia during his marriage to Melinda. He stressed that the relationships were not illegal. One was with a bridge player who was around 20 years old when they met, circa 2010. The other was with a nuclear physicist. According to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, Epstein met the first woman in 2013 and paid for her education. Let that sink in. Melinda Gates, by all accounts, was always skeptical of Epstein, and the divorce in 2021, it wasn't just about growing apart. It was directly connected to the affairs and to Gates's friendship with Epstein. And here's what I keep coming back to. This is a man who shapes global health policy, who influences governments, who funds massive initiatives worldwide, and the foundation that bears his name is now grappling with a founder who stood in front of his own staff and admitted to relationships that intersect with one of the most disturbing criminal networks in recent memory. The question isn't just about Gates. It's about accountability at the very top. When you have that much power, that much influence, who holds you to account? Who even can? That's the thread running through everything we covered today. From transit workers demanding fair pay in Berlin, to a chancellor who wants your real name, from IT specialists warning that the system is about to break to a court, drawing the line on a 34-year student, from a French president calling free speech nonsense to an American president declaring a golden age, from tariffs that punish consumers to confessions that shake a global foundation. The pattern is the same. Power acts. Regular people absorb the consequences, and somewhere in between, the truth waits for someone to actually say it out loud. If this episode made you think, even just a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, tell me what story hit you the hardest. I read them. I always read them. Every like, every comment, every share, it does more than you might realize. YouTube's algorithm pays attention to that. When you engage, the system pushes the video to more people who might never find independent analysis like this on their own. So if something in today's episode resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and if you want to take it a step further, sponsoring the channel or using super thanks, that's what keeps this whole thing running. I'm not backed by a network. There's no corporate budget behind this. Every episode means hours of research, cross-referencing sources, verifying facts, making sure what reaches you is solid. Your support isn't charity, it's a partnership. It's you saying, I want this kind of journalism to exist. Drop a comment below, tell me which story stuck with you. Challenge something I said, start a conversation. This community, you, the people who show up and think critically, you're the reason I keep doing this. Thank you sincerely for being here.